When we add integers, there's a couple of rules that we want to go over when we're either adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing integers. A review of this information can be found in sections 1.5 through 1.7 at the beginning of your book. I have a little saying, when I'm adding integers, it's helpful to think when the signs are the same, you add, take the sign common to both. So here I have -3 plus -4. My operation is addition, so this only applies to addition. But I have -3 and a -4. My signs are the same, so I'm really just going to add 3 plus 4, which I know is 7. And I'm going to take the sign common to both, which is a negative. Let's try it again. 15 plus 7. My signs are the same. They happen to be addition here, or they happen to be positive. So 15 plus 7, and I get 22, and the sign of the both is positive, so that's why it stays positive. Once again, if my signs are the same, they're both negatives, I'm going to add 10 plus 5, I get 15, take the sign common to both. What if I'm adding and I have different signs though? If the signs are different, subtract, take the sign of the larger. So in this case, I'm adding, but my operation is addition, but my signs are different. I have a -3 and a +4. So I'm really just going to subtract 4 and 3 to get 1. And I take the sign of the larger, which is 4. What if I want to add, but this time my signs are different? If I'm adding and my signs are different, I'm really going to subtract, then take the sign of the larger. So I have a -3 and a +4. I have two different signs, so I'm really just going to subtract 4 and 3. I get 1. The larger sign comes from the +4, so the sign of my answer is positive. Let's practice that again. 15 plus -7. My signs are opposite, so I'm going to subtract. 15 minus 7 is 8. The sign of the larger is positive, so that's the sign I use. Here I have -10 plus 5. My signs are different, so I'm going to subtract, and I get 5. But the larger sign comes from the -10. That's why my answer is -5. Sometimes it's helpful to think of integers, when we think of integers, to put them in terms of money when we're adding. For example, I was -3 in the hole. I just spent $4 more. I'm $7 in the hole. How about down here? I was -3 in the hole, but I deposited $4, so I'm +1. Sometimes it helps to put it in terms of money. What happens though if I'm subtracting? My operation is subtraction. Well, I need to change the sign to addition, change the sign of the second number, and then follow those addition rules we just talked about. So I kind of think of change. Whenever my operation is subtraction, I'm going to change. So here, my operation is subtraction, so I'm going to change to addition, change the second sign. Now I follow the rules from above. -3 plus a +4. I have two different signs, so I'm really going to subtract and take the sign of the larger. Okay, here my operation is subtraction, so I'm going to change. You have to make the second change in order for this to work. Change to addition, change the second sign. My rules from above tell me that if I am going to add opposite signs, then I'm really just subtracting. So 15 minus 7 is 8. But this time my sign comes from the -15 because it's the larger sign. Over here, I have a subtraction. My operation is subtraction, so I'm going to change it to addition, change the second sign. Now I really am just saying 10 plus 5 is 15. So those are the rules for both addition and subtraction. Okay, when we do addition, we have these two steps to follow. When we do subtraction, we're going to change everything back to addition and follow my previous steps. What about if I want to multiply and divide? These rules are going to be the same whether you're multiplying or dividing. Yay, that's kind of good. Don't forget, two negatives make a positive. Okay, so if, for example, I have negative 3 times a negative 4, I get positive 12. If I have a negative times a positive, I end up with a negative. If I have a positive times a positive, I still get a positive. Okay, now I wanted to note that I used parentheses right here, but that was just so that it became easier to read. I could have very well written this as negative 3 times negative 4. Well, that's still positive 12. So I really just inserted these parentheses so we could read them better. Something I want you to look at, though. Let's say, for example, I had a negative times a negative. Remember, a negative times a negative gives me a positive. What if I have a negative times a negative, that's a positive, times another negative? Well, that gives me a negative. A negative times a negative is a positive, times a negative, well, that's a negative. So a negative times a negative, that's a positive again. Let's try this again. Negative times negative is a positive. Positive times negative is a negative. Negative times a negative is a positive. A positive times a negative is a negative. So what do we notice here? In this case, I had 2 negative signs. Here, I had 3 negative signs. This one, I have 4. In this row, I have 5 negative signs. I can tell you that this is an even number, this is an odd, this is an even, this is an odd. So we can quickly see if we're adding, or if we're multiplying or dividing a bunch of negative and positive numbers, I could go through and really just add up. Do I have an even number of negative signs? Then my answer is going to be positive. Do I have an odd number of negative signs? My answer is going to be negative because we just showed this down here. Even number gives me positive. Odd number gives me negative. Even, positive, odd, negative. So those are the rules of integers that you need to remember. When you're adding and subtracting integers, we use this a lot when we do solving equations. Also, when we are multiplying and dividing integers. We do that a lot when we solve equations and when we factor.